So up to now, we've talked about key focus on a macro and on a micro level. We know that it controls the windows. We know that it controls the tracks, the regions, and the MIDI events. I want to get a little bit more specifics and I want to talk about something called the text entry box. Now, in order to rename something appropriately, we need to be able to understand when and how this works. When I go into Logic and I look at the overall picture, I can see a couple of things. Tracks themselves can be renamed by double clicking or shift return clicking the track header. And so we can rename here. Also, if you want to access the text tool, this allows you to rename regions. This is helpful for collaborative purposes and maybe just to remind yourself of a chord change that is coming up. Something else that you can do when you're not utilizing the text tool is to rename the region inspector. So let's say I want to rename these 4 regions. We can see that because they're selected, the region inspector up here is telling us there are 4 regions selected. I will click one time over and I will call this 4 regions. And so now each and every one of these is named appropriately. So there's a lot of control and power here. I do want to show you one thing that I feel can be helpful. If I click on track number 1 and I hit shift return, I have entered into the text entry box and I will name this track 1. Now, before hitting return or clicking outside of the space, I'm going to go ahead and hit tab. And what that's going to do is it's going to take the text entry box and shift it over to track number 2. And so then now I can call this track 2. Let's say I call this track 3 and I make a mistake and I don't notice it in time. Well, if I hit shift tab, I can go back in time. So I'll hit track 3 and then we'll name this track 4 in effect. All right. So if I want to access again the text tool, I hit T to access the tool menu. This brings the tool menu to me rather than me having to go all the way up here. And so you can see that my key command for text tool is shift T. And so then now I am going to rename this 1. Okay, I will click here, 2, 3, and 4. And so that's one workflow that I want you to get very much acquainted with. Very important. The next thing that we have to look at is key focus, but not around the tracks, but actually the plugins. So let's read here. Plugin window must be selected as indicated by the white frame. So in this scenario, which plugin is in key focus? Is the one at the top or is the one at the bottom? Of course, it's the one at the bottom. And this is best illustrated when we are in Logic and we start to bring up plugins. In this case, I don't have many instantiated. Let me go ahead and open up the EQ here. So right now there's a white frame. You can see pretty clear. It's right around the frame when I click on the window. So count of 3, I'm going to click on it and I want you to see what that looks like. Okay, 1, 2, go. All right, so then now rather than having this kind of distant view, it's up front, close and personal. So I will declick. You'll see that it kind of blends into the background to some degree, obviously. And then when I do click on it, key focus is now centered around this plugin. If I have another plugin open, of course, key focus can only exist within one of these at any and all times. So I'll click on the EQ. I do my work here. If I shift my attention over to the auto filter, now, of course, I know that I am working on this plugin. I'll come back to the filter. Now I want to close this plugin. So in order to do that, I can go over here, make sure it's in focus and then hit Command W. That's one thing I can do. Or I can also hold Shift, click the top left of any plugin inside of that small circle, and that will basically get rid of all of those for you at the same time. If you ever want to hide plugins, if they're in focus or not, hit V like Victor, and that should do the job. Okay, so we have focused for the text entry box. We have key focus for plugin windows, but we also have key focus for the windows themselves. So in this situation, which window is in key focus? One at the very top, the one in the bottom. Of course, the one in the bottom. You see the color, you know that essentially that window is in key focus. Now, in this case, I only have one window open, but let's say I open up the mixer in a separate window. Let's say I have a setup that allows me to be able to look at two things at one time or something. Well, that's fine if you have different screens, but if you have it all in-house in one screen set and on one desktop, you need to be able to navigate these waters. Now, if I hit tab, that's not going to shift the focus, but if I click on this specific window, Logic is telling me, hey, this is the main frame. This is what we're working on. If I then go back to this track, this is now the main track. Because it is the main track, if I hit a key command, such as Command W, which closes the window, or even Command M, which will, I believe, minimize this, now that is out of sight, out of mind. Key focus is around this primary window here, and we can get back to work. I do want to point out one more thing. If I create a group selection, by default, the first track that was selected will be the primary track, the one that Logic is focusing on, so that if I record enable, basically this is the one that's going to be in focus. If I want to change that focus from track 1 to track 2, I have to hold shift and click on the color bar here, and then you can see now that the focus is changing. Okay, so be sure to work with that. If I want to change this, I have to hold command and click on the track that I want to be in focus. So in other words, we can have all the various tracks in focus, but one of them has to be the leader of the pack. And so if you want to determine track 2 being the leader of the pack, then hold command, select it, and you should be home free. This is important when doing multi-track recording. And at the very least, I just want you to be able to troubleshoot and really understand the inner workings of the program. Play with all those concepts, and I will see you in the next video.